Thank
Recording.
you.
Awesome. Well, we have some outcomes for today. So these are just a few bullet points that outline what Michael and I hope that you guys can walk away with having learned and some things to come and apply for your families as well. So first is how co-parents can craft and create strategy alignment around COVID concerns, whether that's socializing, distance learning, having an infection or possible symptoms, or even a vulnerable family member in one of those households. Figuring out managing alignment around healthy and unhealthy coping strategies for our kids while we're doing, COVID at home, distance learning, quarantining through these winter times, and then when to seek additional support.
So we have a little bit of a scenario that we wanted to just give you a little bit of an awareness of. Here's an example of a case study. Now there's no specific family that's here. We've just created a scenario that we wanted to share with you just to give you some awareness of this is what is happening for some families. This may or may not be like something you're experiencing. We wanted to use this to provide some just real practical struggles that some families are having. So I'll read it to you as well as, because I think if you can, you may have a screen that may have part of it cut out. But Mary lives in a household in which her stepchild is immunocompromised. Mary and her current spouse, Mark, have strict guidelines on mask wearing, social distancing, and for the most part, have been quarantining since March to ensure the health and safety of her stepchild. Mary and her former spouse, John, have joint custody, and their two kids have been going between houses on a 5-2-2-5 schedule for the last 5 years. There haven't been many issues since their divorce and have been following their decree accordingly. John believes COVID-19 is a hoax and is not afraid of the virus. He thinks mask wearing is a government control tactic and refuses to follow along with the guidelines Mary's household has set in place. When Mary approaches John to ask him to follow CDC guidelines at the kids are going between both homes, she gets the following response: "Why should I change my lifestyle to protect your stepchild? That's not my kid. You can't dictate what I do with my kids during my parenting time." So, hard scenario, but an interesting, a positive past. So we have some stress and crises happening for this family.
So we want to pull away from the scenario for just a moment. And throughout the presentation, Michael and I will kind of come back to the scenario and apply some of the concepts with that family as well. But we wanted to talk about some challenges that our kids are facing. Distance learning. Our kids are learning how to self-teach. They have less infrequent and inconsistent contact with their teachers. And there's distractions and distress of being on a device all day. Our kids are also managing social isolation. There's less interactions in the real world and overall distancing from others. Our kids need social and physical interaction with others just for their overall development. And it's a hard balance because on the one hand, we're trying to manage our kids' safety and also making sure that they have this social and physical contact with people, with their friends, with their loved ones. And it's really tough. Our kids are really struggling with how to manage it for themselves. They're learning how to cope with it, just like we are as adults. And they're doing the best that they can. None of us really know how to manage a pandemic. How do we do all of this stuff? And our kids are just figuring it out as well. So if we kind of think about that scenario too, we might wonder what our stepchild Rachel and the kids Kelly and Jake might be managing as they're going between these two households, how they're balancing distance learning between their mom's house and their dad's house. and how their parents align or misalign in terms of social interactions or just how to do school during the day. Our kids also have an impact on their activities. Kids have had canceled, shortened, or just all around different sports seasons or other activities. And there's also a grief and loss that comes with that too. Our kids' school year and their summertime, that normalcy has changed and it's really different. And it'd be normal for our kids and for us to grieve those changes and the loss of those special or just normal routines and events of going to school, seeing our friends, seeing our teachers, going, having homecoming, being able to start football or soccer. And it's these events that our kids are missing out on are really different. And so our kids are just also figuring out, how do I grieve this loss of my normal day-to-day, year-to-year lifestyle too?
A great point. I know in my household, we're big Nordic skiers, and my kids were looking forward to being on the Nordic ski team. And we found out that I believe the State High School League has postponed the beginning of the season until January. So that was certainly, the messaging I was receiving from my kids is this is going to be a horrible season. And for them, there's certainly athletic piece that they enjoy, but for my kids more so it's the social piece. They love being with their friends and being able to hang out, and to not have that is certainly a grieving piece for them. And certainly looking to myself and my wife about how do we respond. And so for us, we have to do our best. We can recover and we can make the best of a season. And keep telling them we'll just have to get out and find other ways to stay engaged. So very challenging times. And our kids, just like us, are going through this as much as they are. When we look at the virus, I think Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a helpful tool to take a look at. So if we think about this, at the base of this hierarchy, it's do I have the physical needs? Food, shelter are the basic pieces. Safety is in that bottom tier as well, so that I can feel safe in the world. Next, we have love and belonging. How do I esteem myself? And then self-actualization. These are just, I think it's a helpful thing. And to know that when we are under distress, we typically revert to a lower level of the hierarchy of needs. So this is how it looks. If you guys remember back in March, man, people were focused on toilet paper and scarcity. I have to get toilet paper, making runs to Costco to get multiple packs of it. So people tend to revert to sort of narrow thinking, tunnel vision. And the concern is that, am I going to be okay? So this last bullet point here is important, because when we become reactive, we are not leading. So the virus is leading us. We are reacting to what's going on. Now, this is where I think our call is to challenge us all as parents to get clear about how do we want to lead in these changing times where things can happen fairly rapidly. And we believe that it's possible. It's harder to make long-term sort of leadership decisions, but it is possible to make shorter-term leadership decisions that you're able to have your children experience your leadership even when things may be challenging and changing on a day-to-day basis.
So, what do our kids need in two household families? Well, first, we think about kids need to see their parents in alignment. When kids see that both of their parents are aligned in how they're going to lead and structure and support them, there's comfort and safety that gets brought into that. My parents have communicated, they're on board with each other, and there's going to be consistency between both of my households. I think that contact with both parents is ideal. Now, COVID has made that a little tough for a lot of families too. How do we balance contact and exposure between two houses? And what we know is that having a relationship with both parents is so important for our kids as they grow up and nurture into their own selves. We know that parents are in the decision making role and not kids. So often we try to put our kids in a decision making role, asking for their opinion or what they want to do, and we end up putting them in that decision making role rather than just gaining their input for information so that then the parents can make that decision making role. When kids are put into the decision making role, it can increase anxiety for them. And so we want to make sure that kids are seeing that their parents are in that leadership role, that their parents are going to take their input and apply that into something that they think is safe and necessary for them to move forward. We also know that kids need consistent structure in both households as much as possible. When kids have consistency through their day-to-day lives, we decrease anxiety. Kids know what to expect, and they can live well between those two households. This last piece is what we kind of talk about, these three key parent functions as being safety, nurture, and challenge. So as parents, we want to make sure that we are keeping our kids safe, that their physical safety, their emotional safety is taken care of, that they feel nurtured, that they're loved, they know that they're cared for in this world, that they have a meaning and a purpose for the individual selves that they are. And that we also challenge our kids too. We set limits and boundaries so their kids understand kind of how the world works and develop them into this healthy, well-rounded individual. So if we think about that scenario in terms of safety, nurture, and challenge, what are those elements? Well, safety, we need to protect our kids from the virus. We need to make sure that they're safe, that they're healthy, that we're doing as much as we can control to make sure that they don't get sick. We want to nourish their mental and emotional health. This is so trying for our kids to be separated from their peers and their classmates, to not do those standard things that they're used to being able to do. And so it's important for us to be able to still nurture them and still help foster that importance of who they are in this world too. And an example of challenge is thinking about boundaries about healthy technology use. Our kids doing distance learning, they're on their devices probably 12 to 16 hours a day if you consider school and then just entertainment purposes. And so it's learning how to teach our kids how to balance healthy technology use, balancing being in the real with family members, with friends, and then also being in the virtual. And what's that healthy dynamic look? So we get to set limits and boundaries around technology use.
I would just add that with the safety nurture challenge, this is where it's helpful if parents can be aligned in these three domains and looking at kids, the kids that you're sharing. If we go back to that scenario, you clearly had a pretty big contrasting view of what safety implies in regards to the virus. Mary is wanting to have pretty clear shelter in place, very clear sense of how to use masking and such. Whereas John, the other co-parent, has a very different view of what safety is needed in regards to the virus based on his understanding of the circumstance of the virus and its severity. This is where the co-parenting work for that family is going to be key. And certainly is in a spot that could escalate into further conflict. One of the areas that I think is very important for us as parents, particularly parents that are in a co-parenting dynamic, and for us as parents in general, is how are we managing our own stuff? If we all just took a moment to pause and take a look at how are you managing 2020, it's extraordinary. I was on a Zoom meeting where we took some time. These are professionals throughout the metro area working with families. Every one of them is trying to figure out, how do I do the work family balance? That's a stressor right there. Trying to figure out how to get activities for their kids, how to keep kids dialed in with school if they're having troubles. And so trying to manage all of those things, the important part is to make sure, what are we doing to take care of ourselves? How are we finding time to have, I would argue, meditative prayer, whatever is important to you, to help get yourself centered. It's important also is that when we're working with our co-parents, it's to clarify what are our own values, insecurities, worries. That's our stuff. And so the more we're able to have that awareness of what's happening for me, can actually help me and empowers me to be more prepared to walk into conversations. The other thing is that it's important to ask for help. One of the greatest things that Callie and I have worried about is isolation. That families, parents, and even kids may find themselves in a fairly isolated place. They may be connecting online through class, but there may still be this struggle to find someone that they feel like they can really connect with. So it's important that as parents, we're working on how do we make sure we're finding other people to connect with, because that can be a tremendous relief. I know taking a walk on a regular basis is important to get outside, and to find ways to connect with family are also important pieces to consider. Well, you guys have all seen, when you're in an airplane and they do the orientation, and that air mask comes down, it says, hey, you're supposed to take care of yourself first before you take care of somebody else. So you can't help others if you're incapacitated. So the message is, our job is to make sure we're getting enough oxygen so that we can have time to care for our kids. So I love this picture here of this father sticking out his tongue. And I think you can all remember when we had our children when they were infants, how they would mirror us. And so the hard part is that if we're in an anxious state, our children are picking up on that anxiety. So it's important for us that when we are managing ourselves or taking care of ourselves, our children are seeing that as well. Now, I would add a couple other things to this. I think it is good and it is healthy for us to share with our kids if we're struggling with something, and to reassure them that I will figure this out. Mm-hmm. I can tell my kids from time to time, I'm having a bad day. This day is not going well. I wanted all these things to work out and they are not. So I'm pretty frustrated. And I will figure that out. So we're doing a modeling as well. We're demonstrating self-care. I can communicate how I'm doing and that I've got a plan to take care of it.
An example that I use with parents and talking about how our kids mirror us is, imagine that you're walking down a path with your kids and a big grizzly bear hops out in front of you guys. Your kids are going to immediately look to you and go, what do I do? And if you scream and panic and run away, your kids are going to do the same thing. That's what mom or dad is doing. I'm going to do it too. But if you approach the bear and go, okay, calm, cool, and collected, we're going to slowly back away, our kids are going to watch that. So they're watching us and how to react to things. And they mirror us. If mom and dad are going to react in this big way, then okay, I need to follow that too. That must be the right way. So maybe just a goofy example of just kind of keeping in mind of how our interactions and our reactions just really impact our kids, and they watch and they learn from how we take care of ourselves and how we interact with our surroundings too. So some co-parent tensions. So here's some tensions that Michael and I have been seeing with families kind of during this COVID process. So we wanted to present just some ideas with you guys too. One of the big things that we see co-parents having some difficulties with is conflicting priorities. An example of that would be, balancing the safety of our kids with consistent contact with the other parent. And we see that in the scenario with Mary and John. There's this balance of different priorities. Mary's priority is really that safety of her kids. And John's big priority is having consistent contact. He wants to still be able to see his kids and not have to kind of change up how he does things when he does have his time with his kids. And so some kind of questions that we want you guys to think about when it comes to co-parent tensions is, if there's a vulnerable family member in either household, what do we want to do? What if it's a non-biological family member? Like in this scenario, it's Rachel. It's Mary's stepdaughter, but it's also a non-biological family member to John. And what level of risk are you guys willing to manage? And how do you want to align around this? If kids are going to school or they're spending time with extended family, are they having social contact with friends? Are they doing sleepovers? Are they not? What level of risk do you guys want to manage? And then how are you guys aligning around it between the two households as well?
We've seen a lot of families coming in just needing some help to talk about this. How do we talk together about this and come to some aligned strategy of how to move forward? It's not been easy for families, but there is hope and there are ways to do this. And so I think for this next part of the presentation, we're really wanting to provide you with a series of tips, 10 tips that we've come together to decide some things that we think would be helpful to you and to other families that you may know. And this, I think, can go beyond just co-parenting. There are many things here that will go with parenting in general. So with that, we'll kind of jump in here.
So tip number 1 is having clarity in decision making. We know that anxiety fuels conflict. When we are stressed and anxious, our bodies go into this fight, flight, or freeze mode. And at times it can fuel our conflict and present a difficulty in us to be able to have that structure and clarity in the direction that we want to lead ourselves and our families. So questions to ask yourself is, what direction are we headed? What's our ultimate goal? So an ultimate goal could simply be to keep our kids safe and healthy. As co-parents, we can align around that being the premise that we just want our kids to be safe and healthy. And now how do we want to align in that direction? What path do we want to go down to get that goal? And it requires flexibility. There's a possibility that you and your co-parent may have differing views on what is the best path for your family. And so it requires you to be able to flex your points of view back and forth. It's important to have an awareness of how your perpetual problems may be impacted. So if there's been perpetual problems within your divorce, your co-parenting, to just have an awareness of if that's getting highlighted again as you guys are talking about COVID concerns and parenting time and all the other stuff that comes with co-parenting during COVID. But also reminding yourselves of historical successes in co-parenting, to keep that in the back of your head too. If you guys have had even just small successes as you guys have gone through this journey together, to keep that in the forefront. You guys have been able to do and move through really hard things, and you've been able to have some alignment too. And so recognizing that there is a way for you guys to have that process together.
When you have clarity of decision making, it is a structure that can lower anxiety. We're seeing many families that are needing just some help in shoring this up because there can be sort of rapid shifts, rapid changes happening. If there's a school change and it's requiring more childcare, then families are having to come together to decide, how are we going to manage this? What are we going to do? So having these things as clear as can be is an important tool to help moving forward. Healthy communication, tip number 2. Some of you may have read BIFF, B-I-F-F, by Bill A. He's an author that's done a nice contribution to the field. And it's an acronym for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. This is an extraordinarily helpful tool for families, that if we can use this as a framework for communicating with each other, it actually can help lower anxiety because it's, again, a structure. if we can choose to stay within this. It's also important that there's timely responses. I want to be careful here because you may get a hard question being asked by a co-parent. You may also be able to say, I will get back to you, but I'm gonna need a little more time. And that adds the transparency. When we can be clear with each other about where we are, it can increase trust. The other thing that I didn't put on here that I do think is helpful is if you are distressed about a topic with a co-parent, it's helpful if you have another person that you can use to run an idea by, or to have them look at your email or your correspondence, or the talking points that you want to present ahead of time, so that you're getting feedback and you feel prepared.
So an example of a BIF response that I think of, if you think about the scenario and John's response to Mary's request of following CDC guidelines is essentially, this is my parenting time. I'm not going to change the way that I do things in my household based on your stepchild's condition in your household. So an example of a BIF response for Mary could simply be, John, I understand that this is a concern of yours, and I want us to work together to find a solution. It's brief, it's informative, it's friendly, it's firm, and it has transparency. I want us to be able to work together to find a solution. I'm understanding your perspective, and I want us to be able to work together. Let's go down this path together.
I think that what you'll see with Callie's example is that there's communication and there's decision-making process. They're two different functions in co-parenting. And when you have the communication going well, it can be easier to construct a decision-making process.
So tip 3 talks about proactive co-parenting in COVID-19. We talk about being proactive. We're planning a structure to move forward in rather than reacting to the reality that's already in front of us. So when we're proactive, we're carefully crafting a structure and an alignment to parent our children within. So some potential areas of conflict that are related to COVID-19 that we've seen with co-parenting is determining shelter in place. What does that look like? How do you guys align when it comes to a shelter in place? What happens if there's a sickness in one of the family members in either of the household? Whether that is a biological family member or non-biological family member, how do you guys want to manage that as co-parents together? And what happens if there is a vulnerable family member that's biological or otherwise? How do you guys want to align and make sure that, again, the health and safety of your kids, that's the ultimate goal. How is that being aligned and moved forward with?
This is important because as we are navigating this, we know that there can be some of these things that clearly can show up. And we are recommending that co-parents are having conversations, very focused conversations on this. What if a parent gets sick or one of our kids gets sick? How are we going to handle this? I think it's a critical piece, and there's certainly lots of ways to manage this. The biggest piece is that you're working ahead of time to get this as clear as can be. Again, if we go back to the statements previously in the Maslow hierarchy, we don't want the virus to lead your family, because the virus doesn't care. It's going to create situations for you to respond to if you can plan ahead as much as you can, so that you have these contingencies in place. And then if it occurs, you already have something in place that you just follow. It will help your kids as well in that regard. A little bit of a follow-up here. Typically, there is a divorce decree, and it would be important for you to go back and review it to just see, okay, what do we have in place that can help us? What are the agreements we have about how we're going to manage medical decisions? What are we going to do if there is a dispute that we can't resolve? Typically in divorce decrees, there's an element of mediation that's put in place. That may be something that, again, if you're doing something proactive, to be able to have an agreement. If we get stuck, can we actively get someone to help us fairly quickly? Um, the difficulty is whenever you try to bring somebody else into your family, it can take time to find that resource. So the more you're able to review this with each other and create those contingency plans is critical. None of us planned for a pandemic to happen. And the more we can create alignment, the easier the process can go. As I said before, what if somebody is exposed? You're waiting on a test. What do we do? Do we have the child stay with that parent until they get the test results? Do you want to have children stay in one household if they do, in fact, have a test positive and ride out 14 days? Some families have chosen to do that. If we have a shelter in place, some families are saying we want the kids to stay in one household for that period of time. Some families have said we want to be able to continue with the agreed schedule we have, and we were going to continue with that schedule no matter what. And we understand the risk is that if our children get sick, it is likely that we in fact may get sick as well. And we're willing to take that on so that we can stay in relationship with each other. Again, no right or wrong here. The best is that you reach a consensus on how you want to navigate this.
So tip number 5 talks about invitations. We talk about the art of the invitation with co-parents quite frequently. It's inviting your co-parent to participate in a parenting conversation. A couple minutes ago, I used the Biff example that for Mary of, John, I understand your concerns and I want us to work together to figure out a solution. That'd be an invitation. John, I want to invite you into this conversation with me. And you can use ground rules. In fact, these are ground rules that Traverse we use with family therapy and couples and co-parenting dynamics. It's that every person has dignity. We limit blaming. We listen to each other. We have respect for each other's perceptions. Which also means that you don't have to agree with the perception or even like that perspective. But it's a respect that each of us have a unique perspective that we're walking into. And then you get to have timeouts at any time. So if you're feeling flooded, if you're feeling overwhelmed, and that you need a little bit of a breather, that you can say, you know what, I need just a couple of minutes here to recollect myself. And then I want to enter back into this conversation because this conversation is really important to me. I want to make sure that I'm in a good place to have this conversation. That's okay to do. And don't give up if your invitation is declined. It's possible that your co-parent says, no, I don't want to have this conversation. I don't see the point in having this discussion with you at this point. We just don't agree. You get to continually invite the person with boundaries in mind to have the conversation. I hear that we're not aligned on this topic. I understand your concerns and I want to gain understanding so that we can find alignment together and how to support our kids through this time.
So if you noticed, Callie just changed the invitation. So if the first invitation doesn't succeed, go back to the drawing board and decide what might be a different invitation that can at least keep you in dialogue with each other. Tip 6, focusing on interest versus position. There's been some nice work over the past 10, 20 years on how to resolve conflicts when negotiating. And there's a great book, I believe it's Getting to Yes. That author's last name, I believe, is Uri, U-R-I. It really emphasizes the difference between an interest versus a position. Now, a position is a preferred course of action or a demand, typically is inflexible. Here is the solution, and this is the only way I can see us getting out of this. Position is typically something we see when people are experiencing levels of anxiety that are high, and have less flexibility. When we go to an interest, it's the reasons for the position I may want to take or an objective that I want. And so A party's interest will usually consist of their needs, fears, desires, and basic concerns, which they are trying to satisfy with their fixed position. If we can stay focused on the interest, it allows greater flexibility to find a solution. And if I stay stuck on a position, it can only be this, it will typically escalate polarity and increase conflict.
7 talks about attunement to our kids' needs. It's important that co-parents are talking about how the kids are showing up at each house, because we know that aligned attunement creates a greater capacity to lead. If, for Kelly and Jake, if they're showing up at dad's house with this carefree attitude, and they're going out and they're not really talking about their concerns with COVID at all with dad, but with mom, they're really sharing all these concerns and these worries, and they present as being very anxious. It'd be important for Mary and John to talk about how the kids are showing up at each house so that they can align on how to meet their kids' needs. When our kids are having 2 different identities at their household, we want to help them be able to have a shared one identity that they can flow between the houses with. So we want to be able to tune into what our kids needs. And it's really important for co-parents to have an alignment about how to do that. So some frustrations and grief of COVID. This is not ideal. 2020, I don't think any one of us expected or planned. And there's been a lot of ups and downs, I think, for us all. We didn't sign up for it. And we still have to manage what's in front of us. So it gets to be both. We get to say, ugh, this sucks. And I need to figure out how I want to lead myself and my family through all of this. And to reflect back on what Michael had shared earlier, it's important that we're managing our own stuff so that our kids aren't taking it on too. It's important for our kids to know that parents take care of themselves and the kids are not taking care of the parents. I liked Michael's example of, I'm feeling kind of anxious right now. I'm not having a great day, and I'm taking care of myself. So we get to see it, we get to model that for our kids, that I can note when I'm feeling a certain way, and I'm going to show you that I get to take care of myself too, and it's not your responsibility. So we also get to live in the discomfort with our kids. We know that kids and all of us are experiencing fear and anxieties and doubts, and I'm sure the list could go quite a ways. And we have the opportunity to lead the family by nurturing and challenging our kids through that discomfort. It takes acknowledging that discomfort is there, and then leading our kids of how we want to manage it too.
One of the other things that's important is aligning around how our kids are coping. Boy, I got to tell you, it's hard because, when we talk about technology, that's a kind of a new life task for our kids. They're learning how to have healthy contact with technology, how to use it in the virtual world, but then also, how do I engage in the real and finding a healthy balance? The COVID distance learning has really thrown that out of whack. And so this is where we are really recommending that co-parents and parents align around how much of this technology is okay in your shared households. And if you can create an alignment or near alignment, it will be healthier for your children. In addition, thinking about healthy ways of managing boredom, stress, anxiety, and depression. So these are important conversations to engage with your kids, to be able to take time to ask them, hey, how are you doing with this? The parts that I would have you think about for our kids, especially as they get into the teens, socialization is where they can experience distress. And anxiety or depression may be about what's happening socially as we have more restrictions on that. So this is where you're keeping an eye on how are they connecting with their friends, how are they talking to each other on friends. If you've watched children who are playing Fortnite or other games, you can see how they're connecting with their friends on there. and they can exhibit extraordinary levels of frustration when something's not going well, and then can in fact be talking to each other in pretty unhealthy ways. So that's a point of stress, right? I'm not liking what's going on. I'm frustrated, and then helping them to see how to operate differently when that's occurring. Kim Scott is an author. I think she was a Google executive. She wrote a book called Radical Candor. And I think this is a helpful tool to use, because I think when we are trying to handle hard things, having a radical candor where we're challenging directly and we care personally for what's going on. So if you look at this, this is just a nice grid to take a look at with 4 quadrants. We want to be in that upper right, where we're challenging with respect, but directness, and that we're showing care for somebody else when we're working with parents or co-parents. When we don't do that, I like this term, ruinous empathy, right? I care about you, but I don't want to challenge you. It's hard because in Minnesota, we have this curse called Minnesota nice, that if you don't have anything nice to say, you don't say anything at all. So some of us in Minnesota can have difficulty with radical candor. But again, it's about talking respectfully and bringing something up that's important.
I think to jump off of that too, sometimes, and maybe it's a Minnesota nice thing, but we worry that challenging people means that we're being negative, or that we're providing like an insultive feedback, or that we're being harsh or mean. And so I challenge you to think about challenging directly a little differently too. That it's providing healthy feedback. It's just providing feedback in general in a direct manner, that we're not kind of beating around the bush, and then combined with that true empathy and that care for the other person, we get to provide feedback in a really balanced, well-mannered way.
So the one caveat that we would put into this use of radical candor, if there's been a history of coercion or control in the dynamic of the co-parent dynamic, radical candor may not be a safe thing to do in that co-parent relationship. So again, that would be a caveat that there may be times that this may not be appropriate.
So tip 9 is healthy use of third parties. So I think about that in a couple of different ways. One is having therapeutic support, bringing in an individual or a family therapist that can help manage the conflict and the distress, either in one family member or the whole family system, or in the 2 households. And finding a path that can lead you towards some resolutions and solutions. And there might be ways that you need to implement some alternative dispute resolution. Do you and your co-parent need to elevate your decision-making process to another professional? Is that through going back into some mediation? You need to have a parenting consultant or a special master be able to help you guys in some of these directive parenting decisions.
Certainly, we'd also include in here, you can bring family members into this. However, I would caution you that sometimes that can create more conflict. You can also have third parties that can be on the side that you're trying to run things by. Hey, I'm getting stuck in this decision making. Do you have ideas that could help me, that I could try? I really want to work this out with my co-parent. This would not be somebody that you might go to and make negative statements about your co-parent. That's not going to help. You want somebody that can give you constructive ideas. How can I get out of this jam I'm in? To generate new ideas. Certainly, there can be therapeutic support, that if your family or individual your family is struggling, it's important to be aware of that, because if somebody's getting stuck, it's critical that you're finding ways to get them help. Generally, there can be family or couples work or co-parent work, or meeting with a provider that could help you discuss things and reach some agreements. Certainly therapeutic tools can be used in those situations, as well as individual. As a co-parent, if you're finding yourself getting stuck, finding that support, certainly if you have a child that's struggling or distressed, is important. There are providers that are providing virtual through Zoom or other HIPAA compliant formats. And there are providers that are doing work in person. Kelly and I are doing both. Approximately half are in person, half are virtual. I mean, you have to decide if you want support, which would be the best for you. With younger kids, it is difficult to do the virtual therapy. So keep that in mind. Children may respond more positively when presented it as a family issue. Typically, when someone is struggling in the family, there is an element of distress relationally that may be occurring. And so if you're able to frame it, it says, we are stuck and we're going to get some help, rather than attributing that you have a problem and I'm going to get you help. You may find, particularly teenage boys, are going to be reticent to participate. So if we talk about, we need to go in together to figure out how to do this different. And we've certainly seen nice success with that. Vet the therapist. If you're going to find someone, I really recommend that you're having phone calls, especially when we're involving kids. It's important that you feel like they're a good fit. It's hard if you bring a child in and it's not a good fit, and then you have to find another provider. So it's important that you reach out on the phone and have those introductory conference calls or whatever. And also remember, you have a family doctor, pediatrician, may also be a really helpful starting point, that if you're seeing your children distressed or you yourself are distressed, seeking help from a doctor may be very, very helpful and important to get that in place.
10, give yourself and your co-parent a little grace. These times are hard and the tensions are really high with co-parents, with families, with our kids. Acknowledging and understanding your and your co-parents' experience of the 2020 distress is important to just have in the back of your head too, because everything that you're feeling is entirely valid. As parents, 2020, you've taken on, parent role. If you're employee, you're also your kid's teacher and their principal and their custodian, and all these different roles. It's so overwhelming. And then on top of it, in this pandemic, that we're just not really sure of what's really happening and how do we want to move forward in it. 2020 has been a really challenging year. And so to just give yourselves a little bit of grace in this really hard time is so, so important.
Well, we are grateful to be in this with you. One of the things I wanted to mention, that as a company, Traverse is considered a general benefit corporation, a GBC. It's not a for-profit, it's not a nonprofit, it's in that middle spot there. And it's our commitment that we want to provide to the community to make it a better place. That's social interest. And so that's why we do these types of presentations in the community and to faith communities or other resources that ask us to participate. So we're just grateful to be in this call, this Zoom meeting with you. And certainly at this point, we want to be able to take time that if there are questions, Carolyn, you might be able to help us. Just say, are there any chat questions that might be helpful? Let's start there. Carolyn, did you find any that you want to?
I have not received any questions yet.
Okay. So at this point, if there are others that would care to open up their microphone, if there's questions that you'd like us to help you with, or clarifications that you'd like, we'd like to be able to answer those. We've got a few moments here.
I would just say that I don't really have a question, but just want to say, I think this is very relevant information, at least for our family. Literally today, having discussions around holiday plans. And one, my son's dad's family is all like, bring on grandma and grandpa. And we're like, we're going nowhere. We're hunkered down. If you want Kira to be, my son to be part of that, y'all need a mask. And so we're like in the middle of that conversation, and it is really frustrating. And it's good to remind ourselves, okay, what's the intent? What's the our interest here of what to stay focused on? So I do appreciate that, and thinking through how we can have these tough conversations, because everyone has valid points, and it is a hard balance without having two co-parenting households, let alone in this situation. So I appreciate what you had to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Great point. Right in the middle of the holiday for Thanksgiving. And if you can get these conversations going now, so that it's not something that's happening Wednesday before Thanksgiving, would be important. Another question is, do you have suggestions or resources or recommendations for how to help kids manage grief or losing out on friends' activities during this time? So a couple of things. Resources, that's where it's going to get challenging. So I think you'd have to assess to see what kind of distress or how hard this is. Making sure as parents you're talking to kids. You may want to see, are there ways to have that child find other ways of getting involved, if it's through faith community? Are there social groups at school that are forming, or ways to make connections? This can be a lonely time for kids. The other thing is, I'd like you to remember that we're going to come out of this. Children have never been in a hard place before. So making sure you're clear with them, you guys, we are going to get through this, but it's going to take time. We need to get through this school year, and then we're hopeful that things will shift after that.
I think that's a great point, Michael. What I hear from a lot of my teen clients and younger kids too is just this overwhelming feeling like this is never going to end. And that this is what the rest of their lives is going to look like, is being quarantined and having to do distance learning for forever. And it feels really overwhelming and really scary for our kids too. And so it's a healthy reminder of just, we will get through this. This is really challenging, to validate how hard this is for them. And we will get through this period of time. And I think I'd also just encourage you guys to not stay stuck for too long either. That if there are ways that your kids are really stuck in this, are really having a hard time, or if you and your co-parent or your family are having a really hard time, to reach out for additional support too. That there are resources available. At Traverse, we'd be happy to join along with your family, or just to have a quick consult call too, to be of assistance for you guys as well.
Well, we are just grateful to have been with you today. And just will echo what Callie was saying, that if we can be a resource to you and your family, don't be shy. It's common, and we'll get just quick questions on a phone call, and happy to answer those for you. So again, thank you. And again, we're really appreciative to Wayzata Schools and that Parenting with Vision. Just really want to support them in that important work to equip parents to be the best we can be with our kids, especially in extraordinary times. So thank you for being with us, and invite you. There's another presentation that's coming up. Callie, you get to share a little bit about that. That's coming up next.
Yeah, so we'll, myself and Matt Myers is our other clinician here. We'll be having a presentation on Monday around co-parenting for adult children. So kids that are in that late teens to early 20s that are trying to launch from family systems. How can co-parents align around COVID concerns and parenting time when it comes to our kind of adult children as well?
All right, with that, certainly if you have more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So with that, we'll close out our Zoom meeting today. We wish you all the best.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe and stay connected to each other.